what everything means and what it does stand for. That even there's so many things, everything during the season, including the timing, the days, is all significant and all has a reason why it is done at that time. And we often even think that if we don't do something on that particular day, that we're still avoiding the entire celebration of that thing. But it's a season, and there are days that go beyond today and yesterday or tomorrow, that it goes clear into November. There are times, certain things, it starts in September. And what happens is that it was started by it's all pagan. It was started with the Druid priests. It involves the killing of animals as well as humans. They had sacrifices of animals and humans, and the flesh was eaten and consumed. These things take place during this season. It's associated with an entire season of death. And that's why we see these things, the origin of things like the skeletons and something that's scary and bringing about fear. And what they said, it was during this time that it is the season that the wall between the dead and the living is open. And that when that wall is open, that the spirits of the dead are allowed to cross over and roam freely around the earth as they desire. And what happens, they say that they believe even that those that spirits would then possess people, would cause mischief, would ruin their crops, would begin to do things, and to keep them from coming to your house, to keep them from coming and wreaking havoc of your crops or their crops. What they would do is they would put out food and put out drink for them to have, and to take that it would, appease them, and they would pass over. That there were the reason the pumpkins were put out, the jack-o'-lanterns. They started originally with gourds and rutabagas and other types of vegetables. But in America, they found when they came over and settled that we had an abundance of pumpkins, and so they began to use pumpkins. But the light was to signify the light of that damned soul. They had, I'm trying to think, even to sit them out on your porch, even if you didn't make a jack-o'-lantern, it still signified the same thing. They have what they call soul cakes that you offer for those that were the dead saints and those their loved ones that had died. And so they believe in praying for those that were already dead, that some didn't go into heaven or hell, they were waiting for you to pray for them. And if they could get enough people to pray for them, then they'd be able to enter into heaven. And what they would do is, if you promised to pray for those dead saints, then you would get what was called soul cake. And they had, during the time of All Saints Day, it was to acknowledge and to worship and commemorate those that had died in history, the old saints. And I try to be a little more politically correct than Pastor, but after a while you can't tiptoe around it. That it was based out of Catholicism, and they offered these things. They did this in honor of those that were martyrs in Catholicism and in quote-unquote Christianity. And so we know that now, as we call that when you're communing with the dead, that's called necromancy. But it was made acceptable, and what they did was they decided they did not want to have this what we call, this negative thing and occasion going. So to appease those that were Christians, they said, let's have something else for the Christians. So that's where they came up with the All Saints Day. It used to be May 13th. And then I think in 1517, Martin Luther had it moved to November 1st. And so that was All Saints Day was called All Hallows Eve or Hallows Eve or Hallows. And so then on the 31st, which was the time that they were during part of the season, because it's an entire festival called Samhain. And during that, it's believed to worship and offer things to the sun god. And so during the time, what they did was they tied it all in together and made it one. And a lot of times what's going on in the body of Christ, we think we're doing a godly thing, and really all we're doing is a pagan thing in the name of something godly. But it was nothing that God said do. It was nothing that was even based out of anything godly. It was simply a man-made thing instituted as a cover-up and as an alternative. Another thing during this time in our country, this is one of the highest times and seasons that children go missing. that young children as well as babies, teenagers, women, you'll find that a lot of those you see on the cartons, this is a time that especially there's a heightened time, we were just discussing on yesterday, that in other countries, in London, in Ireland, and other places, they acknowledge that they are all on watch during the season because they know people are literally being snatched to be used and being offered as human sacrifices. And in our country, that's what happens a lot of times to those that are missing and have been abducted. There are more that occur during this season while we're getting candy and having, hay rides and bonfires, which a bonfire actually comes from the history of a bonfire that the bones of Christians were burned, and it was celebrated even the death of the burning of the bones of the Pope. That's what it commemorates. And but we call it a bonfire, and we think that it's fun. So at the church we have bonfire, and we go on hay rides, and we bob for apples, which bobbing for apples was done in reverence and worship to the goddess of love and fertility as the Ashtaroth. And so they bobbed for apples, which was the symbol of fruitfulness and fertility, and they would have single women and maidens to bob for the apples, and it was believed if you could bob for the apples, then you would become more fruitful and more productive. I'm trying to think of there's everything, even the candy corn. I mean, there's every single thing, beginning of the candy, all of it, the dressing up and putting on a mask was to scare off. If you look like one of the evil spirits, then they wouldn't recognize you and they pass over you. So you had to look as scary as you could and look like one of the dead, so they think you were one of them. I'm trying to think of the other stuff. And the New Year, what happened was the Celtics, their New Year was November 1st. So when they made you see how they started out with the All Saints Day was May 13th, but then they moved it to November 1st, which was the pagan New Year, starting which these celebrations still went on, which also it ties into our New Year. It also ties into our celebration of Christmas. It ties into our time of during all of the seasons. So I just want you to be aware